Welcome to Legion Radio, a podcast about all things e-commerce, the official podcast of the private label Legion, hosted by Tim Jordan.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Legion Radio, the official podcast of the private label Legion. We're going to talk about all things e-commerce. And today we've got a special guest, Pablo Gonzalez from Miami, right? Is that where you call yourself from these days? I know you've lived a lot of places.
Yeah, listen, man, I'm a quintessential Miamian, right? Like I was born in Venezuela. My dad's Cuban. I grew up in Miami. I just moved to Jacksonville like 6 months ago, but I still feel very pit bull inside. So, dale on the Miami tip.
And you mean the rapper, not the animal?
Correct. I mean the Spanglish rapper.
The Spanglish rapper. Got it.
Yeah.
Awesome. So the reason, Pablo, that I wanted to have you on, I met you at an event recently, and you and I quickly realized we were probably kindred spirits in a lot of ways. But you also have a lot of experience in networking. We'll talk more about that in a minute. But for those of you listening, I think that the information and the advice and the kind of the tips and even tactics, like we'll go into some like hardcore tactics here that Pablo has to share with us is super important. So today we're not talking about Amazon software tools. We're not talking about ranking. We're not talking about any of that stuff. We're talking about making your business better in some of the ways in which you could do that. So it's a little deeper. It's a little more hardcore. It's a little bit more kind of profound and some stuff that a lot of people aren't talking about. But they are some things that I have like just accidentally figured out are super, super important. And I see the people succeeding in not just an e-commerce business, but the entrepreneurial journey in general are doing some of these things. So super important stuff. Stuff that we want to share with you guys. And we're so glad that Pablo's here with us. For those of you that are not members already of our Facebook group, check it out, Private Label Legion on Facebook. Hit us up, Private Label Legion on Instagram. Check out our YouTube channel, Private Label Legion or Tim Jordan. And if you have any questions, comments, anything about this podcast episode, if you go to YouTube and you watch the YouTube video, you can leave comments there. If you're listening on iTunes or Stitcher or any of those things and you want to leave comments, go over to YouTube. You can find it after you subscribe to our channel and leave any questions, and we'll make sure those questions get passed on to Pablo and he can answer those for our community. So Pablo, give me, I've got a few interesting facts here. You want to share those? And the second one's actually pretty funny. So we just asked random facts about Pablo. So let's start with those.
Oh, I'm sharing them. Okay, cool. So I will give the precursor of you asked me random facts about me that fit into what I'm doing in this business, right? So I like to tell people, I'm addicted to human connection because I lived in 3 different continents by the age of 9. And like my earliest memories all involve being an outsider over and over and trying to fit in, right? So it's like my earliest memories are my brother and sister having learned English before I did. So they would, talk in English while, keeping secrets from me. Then entering preschool in Miami, being the only kid that didn't speak English and just like not knowing how to communicate with anybody. Then moving to Spain, where I thought I knew English and Spanish, and enrolling in a British school where I could not understand the British dialect and I couldn't understand the Spanish dialect, right? So like, all this stuff really, really marked me and has made me kind of obsessive about, connecting with people and getting on the inside, as soon as possible. Right?
And that's so important because there's so much out there to know. And there's so many people that we can learn from in different cultures and habits and all those things we can learn from. And, a lot of times we, especially as gringos, right? Like we have this like elitist Western mentality. Like this is the best it's ever going to be. Why do we need to go anywhere? My father-in-law's that way. Why would I ever get a passport? Why would I ever leave this country? I'm like, dude, it's so big. And when I started traveling and doing, international business, I realized this is like, it's a bigger world out there, but it's also a smaller world. Like we all have the same human connections. We all have the same, abilities, wants, desires, tendencies to want to help each other, to grow with each other, to help elevate each other, to lift ourselves up too. And living in 3 different continents by the age of 9, it's pretty serious, but that probably really gave you a lot of really good, like not just like information and not just good habits and good like wisdom and knowledge, but it also probably helped you understand just what I mentioned is like the world is big. And if you're not involved in it, like if you're not reaching out to other people and other sources of information, you're probably lacking. The next thing you said in here is a random fact. It's pretty funny. It says when you're living in Spain, you'd fly a lot of transatlantic stuff and you'd always ask to sit by yourself on the airplane.
Yeah. So I'm the youngest in my family, right? And we were living in Spain. We are, my mom's family was in Venezuela. My dad's family was in Miami, and we do a lot of transatlantic flights. And I would always ask to sit by myself because I would always have the goal of, and I don't know how it started, but I always wanted to meet somebody new. And at some point, I realized that if you can talk up an adult, you can get them to, I got Toblerones bought for me. I got in-flight remote control cars bought for me off the magazine kind of thing. Yeah, I was hustling at a young age, man. So I just realized, the value of the fact that, I guess what I've come to realize nowadays is that everyone has value. As a kid, you're the value that everybody brings to you is their ability to buy you stuff, right? But as an adult, you realize everyone has some kind of value, right? There's a quote from Thoreau that is, so I'm completely blanking out, but
I'm sure it's an awesome quote.
Yeah. I'm going to look this up. I'm going to get back to this while I'm talking about it because it is definitely, I have never met a man that is not in some way, somehow my superior. And from that, I can learn from him, right? It's something like that. And it essentially translates to the fact that everybody you meet has figured something out that you haven't figured out. Right. So whether it is pay-per-click Amazon, ads, or whether it is the fact that this person knows how to communicate better with women than you know how to communicate better with women. Everybody out there knows something that you don't know. Everybody that you talk to knows something that you don't know. And if you can get good at extracting that value from people, then, you make them feel very special and you get to learn from them as well.
Yeah. And one thing that did is it led you to this other interesting fact is that you're convinced that intergenerational relationships are what we all need to focus on to bring our society back to the rails. And man, I couldn't agree with you more. And I agree with that both ways. I see so many and I say this like I'm an old man, but I see my generation making these stupid mistakes that were made 40 and 50 years ago and get cycled around. And if we would have respect for the people that have learned before us, let me make fun of my wife. When we had our first kid, all these people wanted to help, right? And we were in pure bone panic mode. We were not prepared for the crisis that landed on our household when we left the hospital and we were left alone with this baby. And people would always recommend stuff. We had aunts and her mother hey, let me make a suggestion. And my wife was how are they going to tell me how to be a mom? This is my baby. Mamas know what's best for their baby. And I'm do we? You've never done it before. Your mom's giving you a piece of advice and she's raised children. Between all your aunts, they've all raised 15 children and we are complete rookies. Why do we have this? Now we're going to love our children more than anybody else. I get that. But the idea that we know best all the time, that's silly. But also it goes the other way. Going back to my in-laws, you guys have heard me talk about before. My father-in-law still thinks I have a fake job, right? And if he would listen to maybe some younger generations, he'd realize there's a lot of stuff out there that he may be interested in, this whole new world out there of the information age and the internet. There's some cool stuff going on that he may love, but because we isolate ourselves in our generational zones, we're missing out on a lot of experiences and knowledge and wisdom and the world, right? I kind of took your thunder on that because I agree, but did I kind of wrap that up, summarize what you would have said pretty well?
Dude, you got it. I mean, so I've been on this hunch for a while, right? Articulating it very similarly to the way that you articulated it. And just recently I read this book called The Laws of Human Nature. And it's these 17 laws of what every society through the history of time across the world has, the characteristics that they've shown are just inherent to the human condition. And one of them is this thing called the law of generational myopia. And within that, which you can guess what it means, right? Your generation marks you, and then it makes you think that it's better than all the other generations, and you think you're the best. And in it talked about this theory from this Islamic scholar from the year 900 or something like that, where he talks about how the world goes in these cycles of these 4 cycles. that are correspondent to 4 generations, right? The first generation is the revolutionary generation. After like a great struggle, they establish a new world order. It's really needed. The next generation that comes after that seeks like getting along, right? They seek establishing the new normal, establishing the new unspoken rules of society. So like, remember that struggle? It's better that we all agree on stuff, right? Third generation is now so distanced from the struggle that they're just like, well, everything's cool, man. Let's just get ours, right? So that's like the materialism, the individualism generation. And then the fourth generation that comes after that is this generation that's like, we've lost our way. All this materialism's the devil. Like we got to do all this, we got to establish a new world order. And then you can guess, right? The next thing is the revolution, right? So you look around in the world today, and it's pretty clear that we're in that fourth cycle, right? Like the internet has now changed everything. We got to figure out how to interact now that all these different modes of communication and voices are able to exist on par with what the networks used to be. And we are about to go through the revolution generation again. It's very palpable, and you can disagree with me on it, but it does seem like that is where we are. So my thing is, if we're about to go through a revolution inevitably, because that's just human nature and its cycles, if we can learn from the generations before us so we don't have to fight for the same lessons, there's going to be much less pain in the transition to a new world order of what we're headed to inevitably.
Man, I love it. Look, I've got goosebumps.
Yeah, buddy.
Some deep mess. Like, y'all that are just listening to audio, I visibly have goosebumps. That's some crazy deep stuff. And, we get stuck in this world of like e-commerce business. And like what people have made very apparent to me lately is like business changes the world, right? So if we're not thinking about the world while we're doing business, like we may miss something and we make some crucial mistakes. Like it's all interrelated. So Pablo, with your kind of experience in, well, let's not say your experience, let's say your wisdom, like your wisdom at a young age of understanding that you need to learn from others and you need to cross these generational barriers to learn from others. Like that's kind of clued you in, I think, on a super hyper level. And like when I first met you in person, I was like, oh, this guy's like super high speed when it comes to like interpersonal relationships. And also like this concept of humility, and the humility being like, I don't know it all. I need to learn from others. And like, I want to soak up knowledge from others, other people, other generations, people of other walks of life. And I think that's super powerful. And what that has led you to is just led you through a few jobs. I'm going to jump around for a second. And right now, your official job, you're an MC, you're a keynote speaker at events. You do professional networking. You assist with conferences. Like literally, your job right now is to connect people in organized formats, right? Through all of these different things.
Listen, man, my mission is to grow community, right? And what I've noticed so back to touch on a couple of points, right, that I want to circle back on. You've mentioned a couple of times this like inherent wisdom of living outside of the US and being in the US and whatnot. I call it perspective, right? Like it's just, man, you don't have to go very far outside of the US to realize that the poor people outside the US are way more poor than poor people in the US, right?
Yep.
And all these other things work. So, to me, it's a perspective that gave me. Second, I want to say that, so business changes the world. I am 100% convinced that this e-commerce, game that we're in is the next economic revolution, man. Like there has never been a time in the history of man that one person can come up with $1 million in 1 year. Like as easy as it's hard, but it's never been easier. So that to me is like a great democratic equalizer of capital and money and upward mobility in society. And yeah, man, business changes the world. And at the end of the day,
what you just said is not restricted by geography.
It's correct.
Yeah. Like when I got in this business a few years ago, I was amazed when like I was contacted by people in Central America that literally have like no money, but they have a laptop and they're like, they start hustling and learning. And then they're selling like $2 million worth of stuff on Amazon. Like, dude, I feel you. It's amazing. It's a great equalizer. I tell people all the time, like this is the best time in the history of the world to be an entrepreneur. But what you're saying, like, I completely agree. If you're not connecting with people, there's no point.
Yeah.
Like you have to have either connections with your client or connection with mentors or like connection with networks to figure out new business things. So, so now that's what your official role is you're a connector. And you put in here that, your objective when you're working with conferences and groups is you want to make everybody find at least 5 to 10 new connections a day, like 5 to 10 new connections, right?
Yeah. per day of the event, right? Like I think people leave a lot of meat on the bone out there when it comes to these events. And if you go about it a specific way, and we can, I think we're going to get into more details, however you want to flow with it, right? But like, listen, man, I come away with a solid 15 friends per day of anything that I go to, right? Like 15 new friends. I know most people out there probably talk to like 3, 4, 5 people.
Yeah.
Right. And it's just,
you got to cover a lot of ground because there's so much out there you might miss.
Yeah, correct. You just never know. Are you familiar with the concept of a black swan?
No.
Right. So a black swan, it's not the ballet movie with the famous makeout scene. It's basically an event that happens that is impossible to have seen coming, but easy to justify in hindsight, that it unequivocally changes the path of the world. Right. So like there's good ones and bad ones. 9/11, bad black swan. Advent of the internet, good black swan. Outbreak of World War I, bad black swan. The Ford Model T, good black swan. You know what I'm saying? And this ex-Wall Street trader, his name is Nassim Taleb, wrote a book about an investment philosophy based around the exposure for positive black swans and the limiting your exposure to negative black swans. And in that, he talks about the value of living in New York. A lot of the value about living in New York is that you just interact with so many people at all times because it's so dense, and you're therefore increasing your exposure to a positive black swan happening to you. And every person that you meet can be a positive black swan for you, right? Like the day you met your wife was a positive black swan, right? Like that business connection that you made at that conference that then, whoever got you to Guatemala the first time was a positive black swan in your life, right? Like that trip for you was a positive black swan, right? So like there's all these, if you can expose yourself to the positive black swans systematically, then you stand to make these huge leaps in growth, income, whatever you're seeking. And networking is a way to do that.
Man, there's like so much here. And I agree with all this stuff, but I've never had it formatted in that way that makes so much sense in my mind. Like makes complete sense, like absolute complete sense. You have to expose yourself to as many potential like groundbreaking opportunities or interactions. You hear people say all the time, like, hey, if you don't have, a hook in the water, you're never going to catch a fish. So put a lot of hooks in the water, and you're right. And it makes so much sense when it comes to interpersonal communications for either personal development or business development. Like if you're not exposing yourself, it doesn't, you're not going to get those black swans. And this is so important in the Amazon community because the people that I see that are doing, or just the e-commerce community, the people that I see that are doing well, they're getting exposed to a lot of stuff. And there's a lot of people that don't, and they're scared, and, they don't think there's much value in going to these little conferences. I don't care if it's a 50-member conference or a 5,000-member conference. Like they're all equally important as long as you're taking the time to meet as many people as you can. So those of you listening, when I met Pablo, we got to talking about this networking and stuff, and we were at even a non-e-commerce related specifically conference. And when he found out that, I kind of do a little things here and there in the Amazon space, he told me that he actually was working recently for a software company that sold directly to Amazon sellers. And I was like, holy cow. So Pablo not only understands the power of like relationships and networking communities, but he also understands the Amazon community. So those of you that just thought I was bringing on a guy that talks about networking, no, like we got more than that because Pablo has been directly involved in the Amazon community. He's gone to conferences. He's had trade show booths, all that good stuff. So he understands where we are at as e-commerce sellers, and he knows how to apply the principles and the fundamentals and the information that he's sharing directly to us. So that's like the awesome sauce that's going on with this podcast episode right now. So I've got some questions for you here, Pablo. Let's start hammering out these questions and answer them directed towards e-commerce sellers that come from two groups. There's, one is the group that like understands the power of conferences and networking. And I don't necessarily mean getting on playing on a conference. It may be networking in a free Facebook group. It could be like joining mastermind groups. Yeah. It can be any of that stuff. And then also keep in mind that some of these listeners have never done any of that. I was at a conference recently and I met a guy who like came up and shook my hand and he's like, hey man, so awesome to meet you. I'm like, do we know each other? And he's like, no, but I've been watching you on YouTube for like 6 or 9 months. And I was like, that's awesome. He's like, I've watched every video. It's really good. And this is the first time I've ever been to a conference. I was like, if I'd have met him a week before, well, I wouldn't have met him, but if I had, like, he'd been lurking for months and he'd been in like Facebook groups for 2 or 3 years and never contacted anybody. So there are people listening to this podcast right now, Pablo, that fall under that same criteria. So keep in mind when you're answering, there's people in both groups. So talking specifically about you, like going, from your childhood and like working the Amazon space, like how does someone become a professional networker? And when I say professional, I don't just mean paid like you, but like a good networker, right? Because I'm not a networker by trade, but I've learned to be a good networker. So how does someone go about doing that?
Listen, the only way to get good at anything is reps, right? You got to put in the reps, man. The way that I got so good at it that I can now call it my job is I came from the construction industry, right? Graduated college in 2003, world was under construction, got moved to Southern California to run this like big operation for a national, Fortune 500 company. I ran the Orange County division, became a green building expert. The world ended in 2008 for my industry. I was able to pivot around, move back to Miami and become a green building consultant, started a green building consulting company, sold that to my biggest customer, and then became the director of sustainability, and then became a business developer. And that was all tied to networking, right? So basically when I first got back to Miami, I decided to use Miami the way that I used Southern California when I moved out there, right? I want to treat it like a tourist. I want to like really get to know my hometown, not take stuff for granted. And I got involved. I started this young professional group that supports Habitat for Humanity. And then from there, I went into this like Leadership Miami program. I got on the board of a couple charities, got on the board of the Economic Development Agency. And I got to a point where I'm working for this like hospital builder and university builder and like big public project guy. And I was kind of bored doing my little sustainability thing, right? Like e-commerce people. It was a lonely game, right? I was on my own little island. I was the expert of sustainability in this big company where this wasn't the core thing, but I was on my own mostly, right? Much like an e-commerce seller may feel like they're on an island a lot, right? And what I realized is I wanted to get business from these developers. I was able to, contact the developer and say, listen, I'm interested in your project. I want to host this panel about the future development of Miami, put you on stage with a politician on the board of one of my charities, a land use attorney whose number I think you should have. We're going to interview about your project to the future, leaders of Miami, right? And that's when, it all kind of started coming together for me. That's when I started doing very, very well in my career. November 2017, at a green building conference, this guy whose business I'm trying to get introduces me to the world of Gary Vee. And that was my entry gate drug into thinking that this thing that I'm doing, this whole like networking to provide community, to then use that community for good and empower everybody all the way around, give, so that you can then, jab, right hook, is doable across businesses, right? So at that point, I sought out, I had a friend of a friend who had this Amazon software for drop shippers on Amazon, right? He was having an event. I told him I wanted to help him with his event. I emceed the event, gave a keynote about transitioning through change because he was trying to tell people that drop shipping is a diminishing business, a diminishing return kind of game, and you got to transition to wholesale or transition to private label. So I developed a keynote around that, gave that, moderated the event, was the MC, gave networking tips, joined him as his VP of business development. The whole idea was we're going to create a very similar to what Russell preaches, right? Before I knew Russell Brunson, if anybody listening, right, of ClickFunnels. Basically, the plan was we're going to nurture the community, right? We are going to enlist the most successful users of the software to become our raving fans, to become our mastermind. And then that's going to bring people in the door. Worked wonderfully at the end of, and I started going to all these conferences, right? Like all these like Amazon Boost and Ezra Firestone's Mastermind and, traffic and conversion, stuff like that, right? And I realized that, being in the world of e-commerce, I realized that it's a lonely game, right? Like I realized it's a very, very powerful tool. But when you are a solopreneur, which I was in my green building, company, and then even within the company that I was working for that acquired me, I still felt like a solopreneur. It's kind of maddening, right? To not have somebody to just bounce something off of, to not have somebody say, hey man, does this look good? Just a simple yes will get you to act a little bit quicker, right? You're kind of spinning your wheels in space. and having at least one person, if not a little tribe, to just bounce things off of is inordinately valuable for you, so that you don't get lost in those conversations that you're having in your own head and you are propelled into action, right? So, that's how it all started coming together in the e-commerce space. Left that company at the end of November, beginning of December. We accomplished what we wanted to there, right? Like I now have the platform of what I want to do, and I've been dedicating myself to hitting these. I've hit 5 conferences in the last 6 weeks. And my mission is to get booked as an MC for a conference so that I can give these networking tips and tricks, right? Like what I realize is that, not everybody has had the amount of reps that I have had, and especially e-commerce sellers have not had the amount of reps that I've had, because it doesn't really delineate, right? Like if you're a commercial banker, you have to network and you have to make connections in the community. But if you're an e-commerce guy, it's a little bit more abstract, right?
You can work in your home office and do the work. So you're not forced to do it.
Yeah. You can work in your home office, do the work, make them, have $1 million business, take home $200,000 to $300,000 and never talk to anybody except for your VAs. You really could do that. But if you really want to get to the next level and grow, bigger businesses and work on really cool stuff, that can really move the needle and change the world, you're going to have to use other people. I don't want to say use, but you're going to need other people, right?
Yeah. Exactly. You're going to have to feed off of other people, not use them, but grow with them. So you talked about, what makes networking so important. You've talked about how it applies to the world of the solopreneur, which is, massively important, but we can forget about. So when you're watching people specifically, now that you've been in the e-commerce, specifically Amazon space, what mistakes do you see people making that are fundamentally wrong when it comes to networking, fundamental networking mistakes that you see people make? Hit us with a few of them.
Yeah, man. The same mistakes I made when I first started, when I first started networking, it was all about hey, how are you? What can you do for me? Here's my card, pushing it in your face. Right. It's, people think that networking is about what you tell somebody to impress them a lot, when it's really all about getting the other person to speak. So it's not about what you're saying. It's about the quality of questions that you're asking, right? The guy that really made it happen for me was this guy, Oscar Reyes, who is a commercial banker, right? I didn't just make up that example.
Shocking.
Who was on one of those boards with me. And, he's a guy our age, and at this point in my earlier 30s, I was doing really well with I can bro with any guy my whole life, right? But as far as somebody much older than me or younger than me or woman of a different age, I had a hard time connecting with people. And while I was off trying to impress people, I would hear him, very intentfully, just so tell me, how's your business? What kind of obstacles are you facing? What's your day-to-day like? What's the next thing you got to do when you go back to the office? And you would get people talking, so number one mistake that people make is they talk too much instead of getting the other person to talk, right? It's all about extracting that value, right? And you're not going to find the other person's value if you're the one speaking, right? You're not going to impart on him what that is. The second of it is, the second one is just the fact that, and I don't know if I want to call it a mistake. I think it's just a tendency, is people, you walk into, your first networking event, you walk into a room, you look around and you're well, those people all look like they already know each other. Who am I going to talk to? Let me check my email real quick. Right. There is always multiple people in the room doing that. Right. So I guess the mistake that I'm trying to get at here is you think too much before introducing yourself to someone, right? When people are at a networking setting, they are there looking for networking. If you see somebody that's talking on their phone, even if they're facing away from you and they're just down looking at a phone or not currently engaged with somebody, you are literally doing them a favor by tapping them on the shoulder, be like, hey man, you want some company? 100% of the time, that person on the phone wasn't really answering an email that was really, really important. 100% of the time, the answer is, oh, yes, thank you. Thanks for doing me this favor to engage, right? So two biggest mistakes I see people making that are networking novices are, one, talking too much and not asking enough questions, right? And this can play to the to the intro. I guess both of these play to the introvert. And two is like overthinking, like whether you're intruding in a conversation or you're interrupting somebody that's like checking their email or whatever, right? Like if you're an introvert and you're terrified of this whole thing, just remember that you really are doing people a favor by starting a conversation with them when they're at a networking event, and all you got to do is ask them, what makes them happy and like what kind of obstacles they're facing, and let them talk. You really don't need to talk a lot to add a bunch of value in a networking setting. Makes
so much sense. So mistakes that people are making. So, what do you specifically recommend when people are going to conferences, like to increase their effectiveness? I'm not talking about preparation. We'll get to that in a minute. But like they walk into a room and they have made up their mind. All right, I'm going to start I got to meet my 10 or 15 people today. Yeah. Like, what's a tip to increase their effectiveness when they do that?
Well, you started a little late, man. Before you walk in a room, what are you doing? You're at a registration table, right?
That's true.
How many people sit there checking their email and checking their Instagram at the registration?
Hotel lobbies, the freaking, Ubering over from the airport, gosh, I can't tell you how many times I've been to big conferences where they have internal Facebook groups and I see people going, hey, I'm landing at 5:30. Does anyone Uber over with me? So yeah, you're right. It happens well before the conference.
Yeah. Correct. So it happens well before the conference, and specifically at the conference, because if we're going to get into Facebook groups, I talk about this one like before the conference, right? But at the registration table, either the person in front of you or the person behind you, hey man, I'm Pablo, right? Like what's your deal? What brings you here, right? Like that, which by the way is my opening line to everybody is like, so what brings you here, right? Like you can use that line at a conference, you can use that at a wedding, you can use that at a little league game, whatever, right? Like, and it'll always start a conversation because it gets people to talk about like what they really care about and why they're there. So, I would say at conferences, you can really meet an extra, it's really easy, man. It sounds so simple to say, but like you can really meet an extra like 3 to 4 people a day by talking to people when you're at the registration line, when you're at the bar line, when you're walking through the lobby and it's obvious that somebody with a name tag is walking in the door. You're both going to the same place, just like taking the split second to be like, hey man, you going to this thing? What's your name, Pablo? All right, let's walk and talk. You know what I mean? Like in the periods of transition, there is a lot of opportunity to meet a lot of people. And if you can just get over the fact that like, yes, you have to introduce yourself. You got to put yourself out there. I know that that's scary for people. I know that it's not natural for everybody like it is for an attention whore like myself. But, like at the end of the day, you really are doing somebody a service by, opening that conversation. Just like they could be a black swan for you, you could be a black swan for them as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Good stuff. So we're coming up on conference season. Like I was just looking in the next 2 weeks, I'm going to be at in the next 2 months, I'm going to be at 6 different countries, all the way to like little 20 member workshop or 20 attendee workshops here in the US. So, and I want these notes for myself, but also speaking more specifically to people that maybe are going to conferences and have not honed in like their networking skills. Mm-hmm. What can they do to start preparing prior to even going to or beginning the conference?
Sure. So number 1, Facebook groups, right? Minimum, introduce yourself on the Facebook group with a message. I don't know why everybody doesn't just put on the phone and go, hey, what's up? My name is Pablo Gonzalez. I'm coming to this conference. Click send, right? Like, hey, I do that for every Facebook group. I do a video intro. I now walk on the beach while I do it and whatever, because I know it gets more attention, but just like video intro to any Facebook group that you're in, whether it's for the conference or the bajillion Facebook groups that we're all in now. Do a video intro, man. This is who I am. This is what I'm about. This is how I think I can help anybody that wants my help. This is the help I need. Just throw it out there. Like that already will get you, and the same, respond to people doing the same thing, right? So like that right there will get you like 5 to 10 people lined up to meet you at a conference when you walk in the door, right? And I'll be honest, you're not going to meet all of them, right? Like, especially like Funnel Hacking Live. Like I probably reached out to like 40 people. Out of those people that I reached out to prior to the conference, I probably met like 7 or 8 because I was just on like conference networking ADD. Yeah. But it is what it is, man. It's just like all metrics, like marketing metrics are like, it starts with the big feeder funnel and then it goes down to the conversion rates, right? Like it's the same thing with networking. So do that. On the way there, that can be a month before the conference, as soon as the Facebook group is up. and you can start chatting and start having a, relationship with people. At the 10X conference, I drove down from Jacksonville to Miami. I picked up some dude that flew in from Australia at the airport and drove him down to Miami, from Fort Lauderdale to Miami, because like I had connected with him on the Facebook group. I took him out to like a Cuban dinner. It was awesome. The days like on travel, like the travel days to the conference, start following the hashtag of the conference on Instagram, right? Like start following it on Instagram, following the stories, get on. Same thing. Video intro. Hey, what's up? I'm Pablo. I'm on the way to the conference. I'm super pumped to meet everybody. Reach out to me on the DM. I want to network with you. This is what I do. I want to hear your story. Hashtag the conference hashtag, right? So like people will reach out to you and you can reach out to people. If you want to get some reps in, some live reps in, I am a big believer. Like I think that people give conferencing a bad name, networking a bad name, because all they do is they go to their chamber of commerce or they go to like their business association kind of networker. That's, all those people are networking. You get a lot of like business card handing out. What can you do for me? I believe that find something that you're interested in or something that you think the world needs. Look up a charity for it and join some kind of like go volunteer somewhere. And all the people that you're volunteering with, talk to those people, man. I guarantee you they're generally nice people. They're usually successful young professionals or ultra successful like older professionals, right? Like the value of networking that you get from people that are in the philanthropic community of your hometown will be most likely the creme de la creme of your hometown. So right there, you're leveling up your own network. And if you want some reps, there's always stuff to volunteer for, man. And there's always registration lines at a volunteering event. There's always a social element to a volunteering event, and that's no pressure. It has nothing to do with your business. And if you do that, on a sidebar, just like what happened to me in Miami, if you do that consistently for like 2 to 3 years, you're the mayor of your town. Like you won't walk into, I'm serious, right? Like, cause it's the same just like in everything, right? 20% of the people cause 80% of the change or like drive 80% of the bus.
Yep.
And usually those people are all the same people that you're going to find at the philanthropic networking events of your city. Gotcha. So you're going to start, walking into every restaurant, every store, whatever that you walk into, you're going to know somebody, and likely, they're going to be the business owner or they're going to be, somebody of influence.
Sure. So after the conference, what can you continue to do to, like build relationships that to maximize and build relationships that you started there at the conference? So the follow-up game.
Yeah. So follow-up game, man, that's kind of tricky, right? Like, I can say one thing: the more memorable you are at a conference, the more that the more special you make the people feel that you're speaking with by asking them intelligent questions and getting them talking about themselves and offering their value, the more they're going to be likely to respond to any follow-up that you do, right? So obviously we know follow-up is necessary. We know that not everybody's going to respond, but the better you perform, at the conference, the more likely you're going to get a good follow-up. That being said, I mean, it's gotten a lot easier with Facebook and LinkedIn and all this other stuff, but what you're doing, right, and what I'm doing, the value of the stage, if you can provide somebody some kind of a platform, be it a podcast, a YouTube channel, like an Instagram post, an introduction to someone in any way, like if you can put anybody on a platform, they're more likely to want to follow up with you than not. So, build your YouTube channel, build your podcast, build your Instagram and Facebook. And like, when you reach out to people, be like, hey, I want to reach out to you because, I kind of want to write a little piece about you on my thing, or have you on my podcast or have you on my interview. That always increases the likelihood that they're going to want to continue the next step of the relationship, or even just like, hey, I'm really interested in what you're doing. I think I got people I can introduce you to, let me find out more. Right? Like, to me, it's always about following up with someone with the intent of providing them more value, not with the intent of like, oh, hey, we talked about this at the conference. Can I sell you my stuff?
Yep.
You know what I mean? So like always approach it from an angle of adding value. And I realize that we've kind of moved past kind of like the tips and tricks within conference that I wanted to give out. When you're there also, one of the most powerful things you can do, if you're at one of these conferences where they open the floor for questions, ask a question. You know what I mean? Like, you're on stage at that point, right? Like, anytime that there is any kind of Q&A, think real hard to yourself and think of what is the most vulnerable question I can ask, right? Like what is the for example, I asked AJ Vaynerchuk, right, at the Capitalism Conference, got on the mic, and what I told him was, listen, AJ, you're a guy, I feel kind of a kindred spirit to you. I'm obviously a big fan of Gary. But I also have a dad that's been very successful in business in his life. And I've always been worried about, like, am I going to live up to his example, right? Much like your older brother who's a rock star. And I've moved on from a couple of ventures. I recently moved on from this venture, right? From this like Amazon software venture. And you've moved on from VaynerMedia to start Vayner Sports, right? Like, having this like big shadow on top of you, how do you draw the line between like finding your own limits and what you really want to do and feeling like a quitter? You know what I'm saying? Like I got that. That's some,
that's pretty deep stuff. That's kind of a lot to get up and say to a bunch of strangers, because it's a little bit exposing, like it kind of exposes you a little bit, and it's kind of personal. But I know what you're getting at, because like there's so many people that are going to resonate with that they're going to reach out to you proactively. So you don't even have to go find your 15. You're going to have 30. They're going to come to you.
Exactly. And that's exactly what happened after that question, right? Like right after that question, like for the next couple of days, I had people come up and be like, oh man, when you ask that question, like, I know how you feel. I have this story, right? It's kind of, so connection is forged through vulnerability, right? Like whether it is your platoon that you went to, boot camp with, your fraternity pledge class that you all got hazed together, or, whatever epic event that you had with people, like the more, or, any kind of, vulnerability forges quick connection, right? So like, even if you're talking one-to-one, if you can find it within yourself to be vulnerable, people will respond with vulnerability and they'll want to connect with you. Because what did we learn at Funnel Hacking Live, right? People don't do business, learn from, follow, befriend people that they understand. They do business and follow and grow with people that they think understand them. Right. Yep. So like if you can share a vulnerability and that person shares a vulnerability, instantly you're connected. Instantly that person feels like you understand them. So as much as you can do that at scale, the better, right? So like one-to-one, it works great. If you can do that on a mic, it works even better.
Yeah, that's awesome. So for those of us that are e-com hermits and we're thinking about trying to get better at this whole process, and we're gonna reach out, we're gonna start going to events. I mean, it can be little local meetups. Like you're down there in Miami with Carlos Alvarez, right?
Yeah, man.
Like free 2 times a week meetup, like so, and they're all over the country. I just use him as an example because he's Miami, but you're amping yourself up to make the most impact on this first conference or meetup that you have. How can people get in those reps without actually going to one? Like, how can we do a little bit of practice and figure out this stuff to get a little bit better at it before we take our first big step?
Like I said, I think volunteer somewhere, right? Like do a structured activity that you can get some networking out of. You know what I'm saying? Like,
and if it's structured, you don't have to figure out what to do. You don't have to try to be creative in engagement, like a very structured thing. You just kind of show up, and even if you're just silent and you just you're listening to other people and trying to figure stuff out, at least you're not just standing there staring at your phone, pretending you're on email or something. So yeah, you're right.
Yeah. 90% of life is showing up, right? So do a structure, some kind of structured volunteer activity to me is the most no pressure kind of if I meet nobody here, it doesn't really matter. It didn't cost me anything. I still went out and helped somebody build a house or whatever. So that's a good rep to get in. I just started going to Toastmasters for the first time. And I had kind of, I've always liked public speaking. I've always liked it. And I am so impressed by the level of people that are at Toastmasters, right? Like everybody there is kind of in this same space of just nobody that goes to Toastmasters, just like nobody that volunteers, is signing up to do the bare minimum, right? Like they're all signing up to improve some area of their life and they're working on it, right? So Toastmasters is great for it. Local charities, just putting yourself out there, man. Just practicing asking people what brings you here. Just get that rep in.
So it's easy. What I keep hearing you say is don't overthink it. It's easy to start. You can get very good, or you can just, even if you're not very good, you can get very effective Like you can get a whole lot of networks without having to be an expert at it, because it's not extremely difficult. I think sometimes we just need to get out of our own way, like you were saying. So
yeah, often.
Awesome. And everything that you've said, is applicable to our community because you've been in the Amazon community, right? So those of you that are listening, keep that in mind. This is not just someone out there speaking great knowledge. This is someone speaking great knowledge that literally has had intimate, relationships and experience and connections to our specific industry. So very, very applicable. So thank you, Pablo. We need to wrap up. We're close to 45 minutes. Any last little nugget of wisdom you forgot, or you think you covered it all?
Man, I just want to say, I don't think human beings have never accomplished anything great by themselves, right? Nobody took down a woolly mammoth one-on-one. Nobody built a Roman aqueduct by themselves. Nobody got to space without the help of others. If you really want to be the best you're going to have to be able to find people to work with and be able to, don't just inherit the community that you were born into, right? Whoever your mom and dad is and your friends from elementary school that you grew up with, cool, man, love them. But you have the ability to curate and select your own community of people around you. And the only way that you're going to, and that's going to significantly increase your life. And the only way you're going to do that is first by meeting a bunch of people, right? And then being able to select from those people. So, get out there, make the human connections. If you're an Amazon dropshipper, go find somebody that's doing wholesale private label to kind of get you up the ladder. If you're doing wholesale, meet people and find out their tips and tricks and understand, what motivates them in the morning. If you're doing private, you might meet somebody that is great at training and sourcing VAs. You might meet somebody that's great at copyright for Amazon listings. You might meet somebody that's great at, creating images for your Amazon listing, right? Whatever you're not the best at, right? You probably, every person out there has spent their, 10,000 hours perfecting at least one skill set, or else you're either not making money or you're on the way to do it, right? But instead of trying to learn everything, learn what you're passionate about, and then go find people that are passionate about the other things that you need to fill into your life, whether it's in your Amazon business or in your personal life or anything else, and leverage them and just, be able to use the community in order to accomplish the great things that you're able to accomplish.
Amen. Man, thank you so much for being on. This is so refreshing and so good to hear. And it's stuff that, I fundamentally know, but I sometimes forget, and it's nice to be reminded. But I know especially in this type of community, this type of environment, it's super, super important for everybody to be listening to and applying. So don't just listen to this. If you're listening, text yourself right now to jot down these notes. Go right now, write yourself an email. Hey, things to do at a conference. And that way, before you go to your next conference, you can search your own email and it's up there and it has these tips and tricks. So thank you, Pablo. Thank you all for listening. We love and appreciate the support that we have here at the Private Label Legion and the Legion Radio podcast. If you guys are not connected to us on social media, take Pablo's advice, hit us up, join the Facebook group. It's free. There's good networking, really high engagement, lots of awesome people in there. Jump in that group and introduce yourself. If you've been lurking in that group and you haven't introduced yourself, do it. Do it now and find your next 10 or 15 people over the next week. So, Pablo, I'm sure we'll see you around, man. I appreciate you giving us this time of yours, this precious time to share this wisdom and information with us. Tell us a little bit about yourself and to help our community.
It's been an honor, Tim. Thanks for having me, buddy. I hope I gave everybody some value.
You absolutely did. All right, we'll catch you guys on the next episode.
You've just wrapped up another episode of Legion Radio, hosted by Tim Jordan. Past episodes, links, and show notes can be found at privatelabellegion.com.